Well, our featured speaker today, I didn't really know how to introduce him because he's like really famous, so everybody knows him already. I mean, you know, like on every television show in the world. You know about Dan's work with the magnificent Freedom from Religion Foundation, which I know is an organization that's been helpful to many people in the Oasis community who have called upon them in dealing with issues that they run into in their schools and elsewhere. So we're just really grateful for the work that Dan does and for FFRF kind of taking the front lines on issues of separation of church and state and kind of helping to create a more reasonable and rational country to live in. And on top of that, he's just a wonderful human being. He's a joy to know. He's a great guy, and we are honored and humbled that he would take time out of his schedule to come and speak at Houston Oasis this morning. Let's give a warm welcome to our good friend, Dan Barker.
So I just signed one of my books to Mike, and I signed it, Fellow Apostate, which is a compliment, actually, to be an apostate. It means you're standing away from something else. And I guess we kind of first met through the Clergy Project. Former clergy who are... Somebody's Toyota is talking. And Greta Vosper, who's coming next week, is it?
Yes, next week.
She's in the Clergy Project too, and we've interviewed her on Free Thought Radio. We need to interview Mike on the show. He's got a great story. We have a national radio show called Free Thought Radio. And before the meeting, I asked Mike, so do you ever miss preaching? And he said, no way, this is a lot more fun. And I agree with you, it's a lot more fun to actually say something that's true, Or just say nothing at all. That's even more fun than all that. So thanks for the invite. I came because of the Lone Star Book Festival. Lone Star College up in north of Houston, there in Kingwood, had its first ever book festival this last weekend. So they brought me in, but then I emailed Mike and said, hey, I'm going to be in Houston. He says, well, come on in, let's talk a bit. So I want to talk about FFRF, but the book festival is pretty amazing. They had more than 100 authors there, and I think they're going to start doing it every year. And I got to be up twice because Jerry Coyne, the biologist who's written a lot of these great books, he's from Chicago. He wrote the book Why Evolution is True, and he's got that famous website, Why Evolution is True, and then his new book, Faith versus Fact. And he didn't want to give a talk, he wanted to be interviewed. So we just sat and talked back and forth with each other. And in the audience was, what's his first name? McElroy, who was on the Board of Education. What's his name, John McElroy? McElroy, yeah. The fundamentalist young earth creationist who was on the Texas School Board, who's caused all that trouble. I think he's the guy that wanted to remove Thomas Jefferson from school books and replace him with Thomas Aquinas, right? As long as it's a Thomas, I mean. So he was in the audience, and we knew that, and so of course he really hates Jerry because Jerry's this pro-evolution, And so during questions from the audience, people were asking some basic questions, and so he raised his hand to ask a question. We're all wondering what's he going to ask, of Jerry Coyne during this question and answer yesterday. And his question was, so, Jerry, do you think you and Dan are talking to each other? You're just a bunch of molecules talking to each other? That was his question. And Jerry kind of said, yeah. Next question. And then he gave me one of his pamphlets that he's written to prove that materialism is logically incoherent or something, and I haven't read it yet. Should I read it? I guess, anyway, I'll probably read it. Jerry said he actually read it, so. But then I got to give my own talk about my new book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, which was really fun. And I think some of you were there, right? Some of you came, because we sent out a postcard. Did some of you get the postcard from the Freedom from Religion Foundation about this event? Oh, great. Good. It's good to see some members. And there's a life member here somewhere. I think last time I was here I talked about my story. The book, Godless, How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists. And that's the book where Richard Dawkins writes in the foreword, Dan wasn't just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you would not want to sit next to on a bus. And you know who I'm talking about, right? You know who that guy is. With the Bible and the confidence in Jesus. If you died tonight, would you go to heaven or would you go to hell? You know, that kind of talk. So I was that guy, and then I changed my mind. If you want to know my story, it's in that book. Last year I came out with a book called, and I'm sure most of you will get this title, it's a book called Life-Driven Purpose. Now some of you don't get it. Most of you do, right? You know, Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. Because religion, especially Christianity, is all top-down. There's a purpose-driven life from above, and we are all, you know, members, and we're looking for our commanding officer or our plantation owner to give us orders. You know, please tell me what should I do, or what is my purpose in life. And if you haven't read his book, it's 40 chapters of just basically. Robert Price says purpose-driven life is just newly packaged, old-fashioned fundamentalism. That's all it is. The purpose of life. And Rick Warren starts his book with a sentence: "It's not about you." And the purpose of life, I'll save you the trouble of reading it, is to know God, to glorify God, to worship with others, and get others to come to church with you. That's why you were placed on this planet. Isn't that good to know? That's your purpose in life. So his book starts with "It's not about you." Guess what's the first sentence of my book? It is about you. Because I think religion has got it upside down. I think instead of a top-down model where there's Vaticans and there's denominations and there's bishops and there's clergy up there above us, here in America we turn everything upside down, and so it's bottom up. It's we the people. It's not some, you know, we call our president Mr. President. And one of the lawsuits I'll tell you about is we're challenging the fact that the clergy in America, and you probably did this, they get to exclude their housing as income from their income taxes. So wouldn't you love to do that? Sure. You know, if you haven't filed your taxes yet, wouldn't that be great to do that this year? Anyway, so I think it's instead of top-down, purpose-driven life, we have life-driven purpose. And the best news I think we atheists offer to the world, and I'm assuming a lot of you are atheists too, and maybe some agnostics. At FFRF, we don't care what we call ourselves. Atheist, agnostic, secular humanist. We all disbelieve in the same God. So, I think the best news, I used to preach the good news of the gospel. I think the best news we offer to the world, and this is going to sound counterintuitive. It might even sound wrong. But I think this is wonderful news. There is no purpose of life. And it's good that there's no purpose of life. Because if there were a purpose of life, we would be trying to fit into this top-down thing about, you know. But to say there's no purpose of life is not to say there's no purpose in life. Bottom-up purpose. And people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was an atheist, who fought for 50 years for women's rights. Who would dare say she did not have a life of immense purpose, but not top-down, bottom-up. So we take human beings for who they are, like we heard earlier in that community moment. We accept people as they are, as is. We take people as is, right? In fact, the word oasis ends with as is. There you go, right? What you see is what you get. What is what is, right? So we try to pretend that we are somehow transcendent beings. We're animals, basically. We are molecules, right? I'm sure McElroy had breakfast that morning and he ate some molecules, and his stomach's digesting the molecules, which are going to go back and do his molecular body. So we're basic human animals, and that's anyway. That was the purpose of that book. But this next book was accidental. I was working on the promotion for Life-Driven Purpose when Richard Dawkins sent me an email saying he needed help with Bible verses, because if you've read The God Delusion. Did you bring your God Delusions? Turn with me. Chapter 2, verse 1. He said, you know Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, who, it was 10 years ago, he wrote The God Delusion. And people accused Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris and others of being angry, strident. Why are you atheists so mad? And I think psychologically it's just a projection that happens. If I say something that makes you mad, then you project your anger on me and say, why are you so angry? When, if you read The God Delusion, there's passion in there, there's argument, there's some strength, and but it's not really like strident angry, except for one sentence. The first sentence of chapter 2 in The God Delusion, he said he's been criticized for more than anything else he's ever written. The chief rabbi of London called it anti-Semitic. How dare you say that? So the sentence is this, and let me see if I can do it from memory. In fact, I'm trying to write a song about it. And it's not done. If I write a song, then I can remember it better. And I don't have a verse yet. And here's sort of the basis of the song. In fact, I got the notes from listening to him. I watched him speaking at the University of Wisconsin when he said, "The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction." So I took the tones of his voice, and the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, and unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. I'm sure some of you have seen Richard give that sentence, and he's got it in some movies that he's made in that. So anyway, people are attacking him for that one sentence. How dare a biologist criticize the Bible? What does he know about the Bible? Shouldn't he stick with his own sphere? I mean, what is he trying to do? I mean, you need it to be properly interpreted by people who are trained in theology, who've spent. You can get a degree in theology, by the way. And Jerry Coyne pointed out yesterday that in his new book, Faith versus Fact, he quoted one of my lines, that theology is a subject with no object. You know what theologians study? You know what they actually studied? You can get a PhD in this. You know what they study? Theologians study other theologians. You can become an expert about all the theological writings, but they don't actually have an object that they're actually studying. They think they do. They think they have this, this God being. But so Richard sent me an email and he said he was working on a Keynote presentation. Keynote is the Mac version of PowerPoint. You know that? It's kind of like Protestants versus Catholics. If Mac versus PCs. But anyway, we both happen to have Macs. So he's working on a slide that he wanted to document that. So he was making a spider diagram where the body of the sentence was this basically: the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And then with 17 spider legs going around it, with 19 spider legs documenting each of these 19 nasty adjectives in that sentence that we just heard. So for example, you could click up on ethnic cleanser, and then out would pop the Bible verse. "You shall drive out all the inhabitants from the land, for I have given you the land to possess." And then followed by more and more Bible verses. And so as we were working on this, the list became really long. In fact, I came up with more than 1,500 passages to document all the verses for those 19 nasty characteristics. And then Richard thought, and this is great, I never would have thought of this. He said, "You know what? This would make a good book." And he meant the pun literally. Good book, get it? It would be the good book. So he said, with a chapter for each one of those. So that's how this book came into being, kind of accidentally. And it was really funny because I was reading the email to Annie Laurie. "Hey, that's a good idea." And Annie Laurie said, "Hell yes!" And Annie Laurie's my wife. She's co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So that was the genesis of how this book came about. And I wish I could talk more about it because here we are in a Sunday school? A non-Sunday school? It's a Sunday, right? But some of you went to Sunday school all your lives, right? Some of you got what? You got confirmed or degreed or whatever. You read the Bible. I was at the Tucson Book Festival a month ago. Huge. They had like 500 booths there, which is monstrous. And I happened to walk by the Gideon's International booth, and they stuck a Bible out. They walk out and they stick a Bible. "Here's the best-selling book that's ever sold." And I said, "Well, yeah, it's the best-selling book that nobody reads." And the guy said, "Oh, yeah, well, I've read it." "You have?" "I've read it 7 times." And I said, "Oh, really? Well, then tell me, what do you think about the story of Pinchas?" You didn't, the story, you've read it, right? You've read the Bible. "Well, what do you think about the story of Korah's rebellion?" "Well, I haven't memorized the whole Bible," he said. And people read it, people don't read it. Even people who do read it don't remember what's in it. I was a preacher. I don't think I remember the story of Pinchas. I must have glanced through it when I was, and I'm sure it comes to your mind, right? But do you remember the actual...
Korah's rebellion, but not the other one.
Okay, so anyway, there's so many of these stories in Samson's wedding, and the stories of, just these stories that I'm reading through them again and going, I didn't know that was there. whoa, I used to preach. I got a degree in religion and I was ordained in the ministry. And what? Did I ever preach from Jeremiah chapter 13, where God said, the reason the Babylonians are coming to rape your women is because you have disobeyed me, and then I myself am lifting up your skirts. God himself says he's taking credit for raping women. You know what happens during wartime, right? And the Good News Bible translate that as you are being violated and raped. That's the good news in the Good News Bible, God said. But anyway, all these stories after stories and stories that nobody reads it, and I think it's kind of like when you're installing a new app on your device in the terms and conditions. What do? You go down to the bottom, you hit accept. What did you just hit? I bequeath my home equity to ISIS or something. Who knows what you're doing? You don't know what you just kind of trust. Well, the experts have got. And so a lot of people look at the Bible. It's in the hotel rooms. It's in people's homes. Do they put their hand on it to become president, to swear into public office? Do they know what's in the book? They don't. Even clergy don't know what's actually in the book. So that's the point of God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. A kind of, I guess, an atheist Sunday school. Here we are begging people, please read the Bible. The country would be a much better place if people would actually read the Bible, I think, right? But who wants to? You're busy, right? You want to dig through these, murky waters of Old Testament stuff. So this is an easy way to kind of get to the chapter on misogyny, for example. The chapter on, as I was going through it, looking at Dawkins' 19 nasty adjectives, I discovered that he had omitted a few things. He should have put it in the list. Maybe he didn't omit them. Maybe he thought 19's enough to, It is. But I found 8 more that he overlooked. So part 1 of this book is called Dawkins Was Right. Part 2 is called Dawkins Was Too Kind. I also have pyromaniacal, because I was surprised at how much scorching and flames and fire and burning there is through the Bible. I mean, just pages after pages. It's almost like it's a black book. Pyromaniacal, angry, merciless, curse-hurling, aborticidal, vaxicidal. You know what that word is? Vaxicide? The killing of cows or animals. Did I miss one? Cannibalistic, places where God... You can find places in the Old Testament where there is true gender equality. Did you know that? It's not totally sexist. There's a verse that says, for example, you shall eat the flesh of your sons and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. There you go. You've got equality in the Bible, at least in some of those passages. Otherwise, you're better off being born a male. It's a very patriarchal male sexual imagery, and the Israelites are all, if you don't worship the right God, you are a prostitute, you're a whore, you have cheated on me, like a jealous husband who wants to control the woman, and as if the guys who wrote that book were these sort of sexually frustrated Israelite males who wanted to control their own women, right? I mean, you can see what's happening there psychologically. So. And then, of course, the final chapter of the book is because what are Christians going to say when they see a book like this about the Old Testament? Yeah, so the New Testament. So I have a final chapter. There's not time to talk about it, but what about Jesus? Didn't the New Testament change all that? Isn't it better? Well, find out how much he changed it. I think the New Testament is a colossal missed opportunity. If this really were a moral tale, an evolving moral tale through history, then when Jesus came along, he could have got up and said, okay, the old is out, the new is in, the New Testament, I apologize for my dad. The previous administration was horrible. My father was a jerk, genocide and slavery, and but we're going to improve. Did he say any of that? Did he uphold every jot and tittle? Did he say, I and my Father are one? Right? So anyway, what about Jesus? The New Testament is a bit of an improvement. A little bit, but on balance, it's just he's not the chip off the old block. He's the old block itself, is what he actually says. Anyway, I didn't really come here to talk about a book, but your most current book is the most exciting thing you want to talk about. So So the Freedom from Religion Foundation, what, there's 5 or 10 minutes here? Or 5 minutes maybe? Oh, we got plenty of time? Okay.
Do about 10 minutes, we'll go to Q&A.
Okay, good. So some of you know about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, where it started 40 years ago in Madison in '76, the same year that The Selfish Gene came out. And in '78 became a national organization. Today we have almost 24,000 members nationwide. We're the largest organization of non-believers. We like the word freethinker. Freethinker is kind of an umbrella term, so it doesn't matter what you want to call yourself, and we don't care. Religious people join our group too. There are some liberal Jews and liberal Protestants who join our organization. And in some of our lawsuits, we are joined by believers who agree that state and church should be kept separate. It's only the right wings that are the problem. Because there's a lot of really good Christians and Jews and Muslims in the country who understand religious liberty and freedom. And we often join together. And Barry Lynn with Americans United is a minister. So it's not like it's angry atheists fighting the whole country. It's people who really support the First Amendment that are fighting. And although we tend to speak mostly for the non-believers at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, just 2 blocks from the state capitol. In 1990, we acquired a really prime corner right there 2 blocks from the capitol. And then just last year or 2, we expanded. We bought the property next door. So we have a newly expanded headquarters there. We have right now 7 full-time attorneys working for us, and they can't get their work done. They even have a full-time legal assistant and interns, legal interns working. And of course the attorneys like to dump the work on the interns, which is good. It's a good experience. So we had almost 4,000 complaints last year. People like you calling up saying, "You won't believe what they're doing in my school." Well, yes, we would believe what they're doing in your school. The Gideons, or the prayer at the city council, or the Ten Commandments monument in front of the high school, and even some big cases in that. And so there is no such thing as a big case, actually. It's only in the news. The McCollum case in 1948 was just a couple of kids who had to sit out in the hallway while there was Bible instruction in their public schools. That sounds like a little, like it's a local story, right? It went to the Supreme Court and became a huge McCollum versus Board of Education. So any issue that you might complain about is a big issue. There is no small stuff issues when it comes to the First Amendment. It's all basically to protect the minorities from the tyranny of the majority. One of the examples I sometimes give comes out of Texas. People think that all the troublemakers are the atheists and the Jews, right? We're taking all the lawsuits. But the Santa Fe case, the prayer over the loudspeakers before the football games, right? Who was it that complained about that? What family and what kind of a family do you think would complain about prayers over the loudspeakers at a high school football game? You would kind of think like atheists, non-believers, or Jews. It was a Mormon family and a Roman Catholic family. Because they were the minority, early Southern Baptist community. They didn't like the Southern Baptist. In Wisconsin in 1890, there was a big case that kicked Bible reading out of the public schools. Who do you think would complain about Bible reading in the public schools? What kind of a family do you think? It was a Roman Catholic, which was a small minority back then, because they were reading the King James Bible from the public schools. And the Catholics were saying it's not right for the government to be taking sides. So don't blame us atheists. A lot of these cases are taken by believers who understand that it's important for our country to separate state and church. That if the two get mixed, like megachurch pastor Greg Boyd says up in Minneapolis, by the way, we agree on state-church separation and nothing else, that when religion and government mix, they both get dirty. It's better to keep them separate, to keep them apart in this country. So for some reason, a lot of our complaints come out of Texas. And the Coons, the Coons cheerleader thing, we would love to sue in Coons, Texas. You know that story? Yeah. We would love to sue. We can't find a plaintiff. There has to be a family or somebody brave enough to come forward to become a local plaintiff. And I was on Beaumont TV a couple of months ago, even asking, is there anybody in the area who would be brave enough to do that? Do you know how that came to our attention? I shouldn't say too much about this, but it wasn't a school person who brought it to our attention. It was a local pastor who contacted the Clergy Project because he's an atheist now and he wants to get out of the ministry. So the person who complained to us about Coons was not, some troublemaker. It was a pastor of a church. He was visiting at that church at that time. So and I can't say anymore, I don't want to get him in trouble, because guess what would happen if they found out? He wants to get out, and the Clergy Project is just to try to help people get out. So the case of the cross on the sheriff's car, have you seen that one? We sued about that, and it looks like they're settling. We don't have the ink dried yet, but it looks like they're going to take it off. When it comes to In God We Trust on the police vehicles, that's tough. But a Christian cross is pretty clearly sectarian. It's pretty clearly Christian, and that can't be there. So that's a pretty easy win. And of course, they're going to settle, I'm guessing, because most of the time they say this, they're going to settle not because they agree with us, but because it's too expensive to fight. And that's a good tactic to use. If you can point to, when we sued in Ohio, we won this case, and the school district had to pay $90,000 to defend this losing lawsuit. So do you want to do the same thing? So that's one of the tactics we can use. And it's actually a good tactic. It's a face-saving tactic, because then the principal or the sheriff can tell the community, I wanted to fight this. I wanted to defend Jesus. I wanted to have the Bible in the classroom, but it's too expensive. I mean, times are tough right now. So they get to say they wanted to, but they were forced because of the financial. That's fine with us. If they want to save face by saying it's the money is the reason, we just want to stop the abuse. So we're suing Governor Abbott. And you probably know why. It's because of the censorship of our winter solstice display. Do most of you know that story? So last December, we had a display in Austin at the state capitol, and we fulfilled every requirement. We met the requirements, the Historic Preservation Board, and then they started saying things like, well, in order to, we even had local people in Austin saying we want to put up the display. But in order to have a display, you need to be sponsored by a member of the legislature. You have to have someone in the government. So we found someone, an Austin legislator. She said, yeah, I'll sponsor this. So everything was fine. And in fact, they even asked to see the wording of the display, and they approved it. And what it is, and we have a number of these, it's about this tall. And it's the nativity of the Bill of Rights. Oh, yeah. Because Christians don't own the month of December. If anything, they maybe claim December 25th, right? But you would think the whole month of December belongs to Christianity. But the Bill of Rights was adopted on December the 15th. And we thought, well, great. Well, let's honor the birth of the Bill of Rights. Well, people are honoring the birth of their... And there's a nativity scene in Austin at the Capitol there. And we thought, well, if they're going to have a Christian nativity scene, couldn't we have a historical display that recognizes the birth of the Bill of Rights, which is what makes us American, really, that the First Amendment and all that. So it's Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, James Madison, and the Statue of Liberty. They're all gazing adoringly down at a manger that has the Bill of Rights in it. With a sign explaining it's December the 15th is the birth of the Bill of Rights. So that's kind of cute, right? It's kind of like, well, Governor Abbott went by it, and he looked at it, and he said, this is offensive, this is juvenile, this is ridiculing religion, this does not contribute to good values of Texan citizens, this needs to go. He ordered it removed. In fact, it was going to come down the next day, actually. So for us, that was better than a Christmas present. Oh, it was wonderful. Because of the media and the news, the governor takes out, so we're suing over that. That's a free speech violation. It's equal protection. It's also an Establishment Clause violation under the First Amendment. That he can't prefer one religious viewpoint over another that counters that religious viewpoint. In fact, the paper in Austin editorialized in our favor. There was a great op-ed there saying that our sign, our nativity for the Bill of Rights, was actually kind of an homage to Christianity. It was not like ridiculing. It was like saying, we all have ways of talking about the birth. At least our birth was something real. At least the Bill of Rights. And think of the irony. What is it that protects our free speech? The Bill of Rights. And what did Governor Abbott want to take out of the Capitol, right? So anyway, we're suing on that. And who knows what arguments they're going to use. They're going to try all these other procedural and arcane standing and all that kind of crap that happens a lot to try to get you out of court before you even get to the merits. So Texas is one of our favorite states. But it's all over the country, and our attorneys are super, super busy defending that wall of separation between religion and government. So I could talk forever. I used to be a preacher, so I could just... and we shouldn't... This is a bottom-up thing. This is not like a top down. So how do we do the
I'm
questions?
gonna get the handheld mic, and I'll
Okay.
take it around so people can hear the questions
All right.
that are being asked, and we'll do that for a few minutes.
The nativity thing reminded me, apparently, some of you may remember this, back when Ann Richards was governor, somebody took exception, Free Love Group, I can't remember who took exception, might have been you guys, to the nativity scene in the state capitol, and Ann Richards said, oh, let the nativity scene stand there, because it's the only time there'll ever be 3 wise men in the capitol.
What exactly was that article? I didn't get all the details about Tennessee voting the Bible as the state book.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's been signed by the governor yet. Yeah, the Tennessee legislature, the House, and then the Senate just voted, and it wasn't unanimous, but they just voted to make the Bible Tennessee's state book. So. And the governor was expressing reservations on state church grounds as well, and so we, as of last Friday, what's today, Sunday? We still didn't know. Maybe he signed it when I was on the plane, but so far it hasn't been signed. We're protesting, we're putting out an action alert. That's something we'd love to sue on, because the Bible establishes the nation of Israel, not the United States of America, right? The Bible is some foreign soil kind of a thing, and there's no biblical values upon which our country was based. So we'll be able to make all those arguments, and if we do go to court in Tennessee on that, in fact, the letter that we sent, the press release that we sent, pointed out basically some of this stuff. Does Tennessee, of all states, want to endorse a book that endorses slavery? Because it really is a slavery. Well, if they do, they're not going to say it publicly, are they? They're going to have to find some other. So anyway, here in a country where we had a bloody civil war to overthrow it, and you know that many pulpits in the South were using the Bible correctly. The Bible, if the Bible's a source, it correctly endorses slavery. So that's a lot of they're all over the country we have. Even up in Ohio. Ohio, for some reason, tends to be kind of like Texas. I don't know why. There's some states in the north that are still, Sunday school states, I guess. Another question? Okay.
So, 2 protests that I guess I'd like to share, and then 1 question for you. One thing I like to do if I use cash, which isn't often, I take a Sharpie and I scratch out the word God, and then I write in big letters, atheist money on it.
That's good.
Circulation. The other thing I do when I travel, there's always one of those Bibles, and I just write, this is a work of fiction, and put it back in the drawer. So those are my 2 small little protests.
They're not small. They're actually very powerful. That's good.
But my question is this, in regards to, I somewhat agree with you, the best way to make an atheist is say, go ahead and read the Bible. I guess in this day and age, some people are so pig-headed, they're going to say, well, if the Bible says 1 and 1 equals 3, well then 1 and 1 equals 3. And then as they read it, doesn't that breed more of the ISIS, Westboro Baptist Church type of fundamentalists who they're right about what the Bible says? So is that a concern?
Well, those people are going to be there anyway. I think there's probably a bell curve distribution of people on the left and the middle and the right. And these people over here on this tail end, they're not going to be looking at the Bible as critically. They're going to be looking at it as a worship text. Like Muslims look at the Quran. They don't care what it says. It's a worship text. It's a place to meditate. So this book is aimed not so much at the truth value of the Bible, but at the moral value of the Bible, right? Is it a God you could actually worship? And I know people who have read the Bible, who were believers. They read through it with an open mind. They got to the end of it and said, yep, I'm an atheist. In fact, we surveyed our organization. 8,000 people responded to our national survey. It was quite a job to tabulate all that. And 4% of our groups cited the Bible as the reason they're atheists. That's a pretty significant group. 4% said they read the Bible, yep, I'm an atheist now. Isaac Asimov said, properly understood, the Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived. And A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh, the author, he said he thinks the Old Testament is responsible for more atheists than any other literature ever written. So yeah, those people over here, they're not going to be phased. But there's a whole bunch of people in the middle, like I used to be. Like there's a whole bunch of people who do. They just want to know, and once they know, they go, oh. So I don't know how anyone can read through some of these horrible passages of genocide and filicide and dashing babies against the rock and ripping open pregnant women, not commanded and condoned and committed by God himself. How can they say that we admire and worship this being? This doesn't prove there's no God. This proves that the God of the Bible is not a good God. If you want to go ahead and worship such a monster, well then you're a monster yourself, I think. So it'll have some effect. But you're right, there's some people who have totally deaf ears. They're not looking at it like it's a book to be criticized like any other work of literature. They're looking at it like it's the fountain of all knowledge and worship. So,
Yeah, but I'm going to take this question, go back to Sam, and then we'll hit 2 more, and then we'll have to wrap it up, I think, because we're going to run out of time. But Dan will stick around. He'll do a book signing, right, for over there. So, also, when you were talking about those gruesome stories of the Old Testament, I just kept thinking, I cannot wait for Game of Thrones to start. That's what it sounds just like.
I don't really understand all the value of settling some of these cases, but I'm curious about the one, Governor Abbott's case. I mean, you wouldn't want to just settle that one out of court, would you?
yeah, so sometimes a case can end with a decision from the court, or it can end with a settlement where the parties agree, okay, now we've gone through all this and now let's see if we can agree. And a lot of the courts are so busy nowadays that they're hoping that people will settle. And there's a lot of mediation process that sometimes there's forced mediation to see if you can settle this without going to court. But our organization does not like to settle. We tend to be pretty purist about the separation of state and church. So the only times we will settle is when we are absolutely satisfied. For example, the school changes its policy and is now no longer going to allow Bibles distributed in the school. Then we're going to stop asking for equal time to distribute our literature. So that's a good settlement. In other words, a settlement can be a victory. Many settlements can be victories, and sometimes a settlement results from just a straight out victory, where the other side caves in and says, "All right, we're not gonna fight this anymore. We're going to take the crosses off the back of the police cars." That's a settlement, right? You didn't get a judge to make a decision. So settling is not always bad. Sometimes settling is bad is when both sides compromise and you get kind of half of what you want. And then sometimes the ACLU likes to settle cases to get half a victory. And we tend to want to go for the whole victory, either or, right? So most often what happens is not that it's a settlement, but is that we get kicked out on standing. They will say, you don't have the right to even take this lawsuit. Regardless of whether you're right or wrong, you can't even come into court. That's a worse problem right now. So a lot of our legal briefs are spending time on establishing standing. This new lawsuit that we're just filing, challenging the clergy, the housing allowance for clergy that I referenced before, we won the case in federal court. The appeals court in Chicago overturned it, not on the merits. It didn't say the judge was wrong, but on standing, that Annie, Lori, and I had not shown injury to even get into court. They were ducking the issue. So now we have gone back, it's taken 2 years for the FFRF to give us a housing allowance and for us to appeal for a refund and for the IRS to deny our refund So now we're going back into court with evidence that the IRS has actually harmed us and denied us the refund. And by the way, in the process, we realized we may as well ordain all of our attorneys too. And so this year, for the first time, some of our attorneys are going to go ahead and claim the housing. They're going to pay their taxes, but then they're going to ask for a refund, the 1040X, to see if they can get standing as well. So either way, we're going to win. Either the clergy are going to lose it, or all nonprofits are going to get it. Wouldn't that be something? So.
You touched on this a little bit, but in like the school in Colorado that set up an open forum for the Mennonites, but then this group of Satanists swooped in, and now they want their literature distributed as well. And the invocations in the town hall meetings in Arizona, I think, where if they're allowed to invoke Christ at their meetings, then this Satanist group wants to invoke Satan at the town hall meetings as well. What is your opinion on that tactic of just sort of putting them to their own sort of logic of inserting religion in a public forum?
Yeah, it's a great tactic. We call it a Plan B. Plan A is to stop the practice in the first place, right? There shouldn't be any prayers of any kind. But if the city or the school board insists on having a prayer or whatever, and by the way, we're almost ready to sue Congress over prayers, by the way. Well, I can't talk too much about it, but Representative Mark Pocan, who represents the district I live in, has asked the chaplain of the House to have me come in and do an atheist prayer before Congress. The chaplain has said no. The chaplain has turned me down. He said, you have to be an ordained minister. Well, I have an ordination, right? Well, you have to address a higher power. He's pulling these rules out of some place. Because there have been guest chaplains who were not ordained, who were not ministers, who, and so anyway, he's trying to keep me out. So, and so we're asking basically that same thing. We're asking for Plan B. We don't think there should be a chaplain. And this chaplain gets $180,000 a year or something. Plus he's got 8 staff members and he travels the country collecting huge speaking fees. And his only duty is to offer a prayer at the beginning of Congress each day. That's his only duty as an officer of this. So anyway, so we're going to have trouble with standing on this one. And we've met all the requirements. And so I said, well, I'm going to reference a higher power, the higher power of reason, which you ought to try it sometime, So anyway, that's so this Plan B. The Satanic Temple, by the way, is an atheist group. They don't believe in Satan. They don't believe in the supernatural. They have good human values. They're just basically a good humanist group, but they're calling it Satanic Temple as a tactic to what you're talking about, to challenge whether or not these governments really are being fair in their policy. So we sued a school district in Florida that was allowing the Bible to be passed out, and we asked for our material to be passed out, and they censored some of our material, although they didn't censor any of the Bible. They never read it, or they would have censored it. But, so we were going to put our material. Well, then the Satanic Temple got wind of that and said, well, we want our material too. So these little satanic coloring books, have you seen them? They're really cute. And so the school district was faced with, oh no, now everybody in the world is going to start jumping in and start putting their literature. So they changed the policy. And so we won. They said, no, okay, no more distribution by outside groups in the public schools, which is what we wanted in the first place. But to get there, since we couldn't win with Plan A, we had to go to Plan B and ask for equal time. So that's happening in some cities where they are allowing prayer, and the Greece decision that just came down said you can have prayer as long as it's non-sectarian and you allow all points of view. So we have a Nothing Fails Like Prayer contest. If you will give a secular invocation before a city that does that, videotape it, then we're going to pick 3 winners and give you a free trip to our convention this year. Even if they don't change their policy and they are allowing non-believing views, at least we've got that. At least we've got recognition that we're on the map too. We non-believers are part of your community too, and we don't like prayer, but if you're going to have it, you're going to have to deal with us too. So some of you would love to do that, wouldn't you?
Okay, we have time for one more question.
I wanted to ask you, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to the gentleman back here who said he writes in the Gideon Bibles. I do the same thing. I'm a little more verbose than this is a work of fiction. I was raised and inculcated into Lutheran Church. It was I would say, a long, dark journey to get out because I didn't know I had been indoctrinated. You don't know that. When you said that 4% of people you found have left because of the Old Testament, I know for me it was a series of revelations over time. One of which was just meeting another family that apparently didn't do anything on Sunday mornings, which I never realized was an option. So my question is, 4% Old Testament, okay, what are the other ways you find that people have come to acknowledge that we are beings of reason and we made all this other stuff up? And I guess the other thing is, what are the ways you have found that, we haven't come out to our families yet, what are the ways you have found that people can then be an example for people who are still struggling or don't even know that they've been indoctrinated.
Yeah.
That's kind of like and thank you for the work you do.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you, Mike.
It's the funnest job in the world. I think I agree with Mike. There's nothing more fun than, Annie Laurie says, there's nothing more fun than suing the government. And I add, there's nothing more fun than suing the government and winning. I mean, that's just, so I mean, Annie Laurie has this go-get-em mentality. Let's do it. And media savvy too. And by the way, it's 4% said it was the Bible, not just the Old Testament.
Okay.
4% read the way. The majority of people in our survey credited reason. It just doesn't make sense. They were thinking about it, and it was intellectual. And that was my story. Some of them credit emotional things. Some of them are mad at the way the church treats women or the way the church does it. I mean, there were other reasons people gave, but the majority of it was an intellectual thing. This just doesn't make any sense, right? If you think about the evidence for God and the contradictions, and if you think about there's not even a coherent definition. What are we even talking about, And all the definitions disagree. And Paul wrote in the Bible, God's not the author of confusion. But can you think of a book that's caused more confusion than the Bible? There's all these thousands of groups, and you start thinking about, and then they don't agree with each other, and then you realize that people, like you said, that you can live a good, happy, loving, purposeful, moral life without this belief in the transcendent. Dennis and Amy, where are you guys? They were driving me here today. Oh, they're in the children's room. They were talking about how in their new community, their neighbors are cottoning on to the fact that they don't go to church on Sundays. And their kids are all playing with each other. And it's like for the first time, they're realizing, some of our neighbors don't go to church. And that's kind of cool that they now have it's kind of like what happened in the gay movement. As soon as somebody who's gay, you have a niece or a nephew or something, then you know what their lives are like. You go, well, I don't want to discriminate against them. I don't want, you know what I mean? So there's no advice. I'm not a preacher anymore, so there's no advice about how to tell your own family. I was talking in Arlington, Texas 3 or 4 years ago, and the vice president of the student club said, I got to go home this December and break my parents' hearts. I got to go home and tell them my first year of college, I'm coming home an atheist. And I don't know what to do. This is going to be horrible, And he said, and besides that, last week my younger brother came out as gay. And so now what am I supposed to do when I go home for Christmas break? And so Rebecca, who was the president of the group, she said, here's what you do. You go home and say, Mom and Dad, I've got some great news. I'm not gay. So there's no, I don't know, but I have heard stories, and I think some of you could say the same thing, that it actually didn't turn out as bad as you thought it might. In my case, my mom and dad were really shocked, but later both became atheists. Isn't that something? I never would have thought that. So you never know what it's going to be like. And of course, you want to be yourself. And I told my mom and dad, you raised me to have integrity and to speak what's true and to be honest. You raised me that way, and I appreciate those values, so I have no choice but to be honest and show integrity and to tell you what you don't want me to deceive you. You want me to tell the truth. So, and for me, it worked. I don't know if it's going to work in your family. Only you're going to know that, but at least try something. Are we done here?
Thank you so much for your day.